Hi everyone, welcome back from tea. May I please invite everyone to take their seats, please? Alright everyone, hope tea was great for you guys. Well rested, well fed, empty bladders. Alright, so Alright everyone, it is my pleasure to welcome the moderator for our first track, Sikoi, to take the stage. Sikoi, please.
Thank you, Nasri, and a very good morning to everybody. I hope you are ready for our first track of the day. My name is Zikoi, and I'll be your moderator for our Living with Nature track. This track is specially curated to encourage participants to think about living with nature in Southeast Asia. What does it mean? What did it used to be? How is it today? And how can we work towards achieving a living with nature that's meaningful to all of us here? We will hear from our host of speakers, who will be talking about the different ways of living with nature in Southeast Asia, and will be sharing about the people who have fought for our living with nature. We will be hearing from some of these people who are the beacons of our regional efforts to advocate for nature stewardship and promote for harmonious wildlife-human coexistence. We will look at alternative forms of knowledge and relationships with nature that can help us live with nature. Our diverse range of speakers hailing from the Philippines, Cambodia, and Singapore each bring with them unique perspectives, approaches, and experiences from their fields. We hope that through their sharings, you'll think about what living with nature means to each of you, the efforts that must be taken, and challenges that must be overcome in order to achieve that. Yet, we also hope that this session will encourage and empower you to be the nature stewards of tomorrow, helping our societies coexist peacefully alongside nature. Our first speaker, Ms. Jennifer Tauli-Korpas, is a lawyer by education and is currently the Managing Director for Policy at Nea Terras. She is a member of the Igorot peoples from the Mountain Province in the Philippines, and today, she works with indigenous peoples around the world to advocate for better governance in support for their ways of life. Indigenous peoples have been left out of conversations involving conservation for far too long, despite the wealth of knowledge and unique relationships they have with nature. Today, Ms. Jennifer will share about the roles Indigenous peoples play in conservation around the world. She will talk about their unique knowledges, perspectives, and relationships that they have with nature as they live alongside it, as well as how partnerships with Indigenous peoples have benefited wildlife conservation by tapping on all of the above. Without further ado, Ms. Jennifer, please.
Sorry about the title. It's quite a mouthful. But before I start, gawis ay agu yu amin, sakun si Jing nagapuak, is nan bilbilig nan busaw. In my indigenous language, I greet all of you. My name is Jing, and I come from the mountains of Busao in the Cordillera region of the Philippines. My people are called the Kankanaey Igorot people, one of the indigenous peoples in that region. Okay, so it's quite a long presentation, and it's global in scope. I wasn't supposed to be the first presenter, but because I have sort of this global perspective, maybe that's the reason they put me first. So what's the global context? Melvin earlier, Dr. Melvin, talked about extinction and mass extinctions. We're undergoing the 6th global mass extinction. And I wanted to talk about a different convention this time, not CITES, but the Convention on Biological Diversity, which has recognized this problem and in 2018 set up a process to develop a more ambitious strategy for how we address the problem of extinction. We were supposed to adopt this new framework in 2020, but then COVID happened, which again brought to the fore the different problems that we have when we destroy the habitat of the different wild species in our planet. So, before we could go and adopt this new global framework, there needed to be an assessment of how we were doing with the current targets. So these were the targets that were adopted in 2010, called the Aichi Biodiversity Targets. And it's not a nice picture. Very few green. Green means we achieved the goal. Purple means we're going in the reverse direction. And so it wasn't a good picture, and it was important for us to see this so that we could know what we need to do in order to reverse the trend. There was a study conducted by what we call an intergovernmental panel on biodiversity and ecosystem services, and they identified the main drivers of deforestation: land use change, land degradation, overexploitation of species, invasive alien species, pollution, and climate change. So we needed to address all of those things in order to prevent continued extinction. So that's the body that did it. And then they developed this sort of theory of change. So they put the drivers here and identified what we need to do so that we achieve the vision of living in harmony with nature. And I'm here to tell you about how indigenous peoples play into this equation. So the IPBES study that I mentioned also looked at who are protecting nature. And one of the things that they've discovered is that indigenous territories, although only 40% of them overlap with formally protected areas, they are islands. The territories that indigenous peoples are found in are islands of biodiversity in a sea of degradation. So nature is declining everywhere at alarming rates, but in indigenous territories, they are declining still, but at a much lower rate. And we were in Montreal and in the different other meetings of the CBD to tell people about why do we think this is the case. And we discovered that all over the world, but also here in Southeast Asia, it's because of the spiritual and reciprocal way that indigenous peoples regard nature and the very close relationship that we have with nature. So we have in my community, many sacred sites that have been declared. And we thought it was just a matter of religion or spirituality. But upon closer inspection, you discover that these are the areas, that the hunters go to, and they find out that these are the areas where some species go and give birth to their young. And so it becomes declared as a sacred site so that the different species can recover. And that's true in many, many different parts of the world. And this is a map that shows that about 28% of the global land area is actually stewarded by indigenous peoples. And these are the areas that are there, whether they are formally recognized through land titles or not. So you can see, that those practices are there in many different parts of the world, and that if we talk about partnerships, we cannot ignore the role that indigenous peoples have. Okay? It's an old map, it's not updated, but this is a map developed by an organization in the Philippines called for the Philippine Association for Intercultural Development. But you can see it's very illustrative. They did, based on government data, they mapped the forest cover of the Philippines, and then they overlaid it with the key biodiversity areas, so it makes sense, no, that you see biodiversity in the forested areas. And then they looked, and of course, the limitation here is that this is terrestrial. It doesn't really look at the marine spaces. Okay, pink are the protected areas, and as I said, this is not updated because recently the Philippines, through the leadership actually of Dr. Lim, recognized indigenous peoples and community conserved territories and areas, so it's not there yet. But you can see a strong overlap between indigenous territories and those that are key, the places that are key for biodiversity. And again, this is developed by young people within PAFI, the organization. This is something that we found that young people are adept at. So that was the case. That was the evidence that we used to strengthen our case that there need to be strong partnerships with indigenous peoples. You cannot be left behind. Okay, good. So, in December this year, we had the Conference of the Parties, the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties, and the main agenda was the adoption of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. After 4 years of hard work, in the early morning, we were waiting, and then at 3 a.m., finally, they managed to adopt this framework. And it recognized the strong role of indigenous peoples. 25% of the goals, so 4 goals, 1 goal, explicitly mentions indigenous peoples. And then 7 out of the 23 targets explicitly mention indigenous peoples. Okay? Of course, other parts of the targets are relevant for indigenous peoples. And what it means is that things will need to change to enable stronger partnerships with indigenous peoples and local communities. So there need to be updating of the national biodiversity strategies and action plans. If the strategies are still valid for a long time, like in the Philippines, it's valid, I think, until 2028, then there will be national commitments that need to be developed so that we fulfill the requirements, no? Okay, and there needs to be full and effective participation of indigenous peoples. So what I wanted to do is to walk you through a little bit this goal, the 1 goal, and the 7 targets that mention indigenous peoples. Okay, so the decision talks about participation of indigenous peoples, but it also reaffirms that the target should be implemented in a way to give effect to the rights. Okay? And then it identifies what the rights are. So there's something called free, prior, and informed consent before the knowledge of indigenous peoples can be used, participation, and it also lists the different instruments that could provide guidance. Okay? Then goal C, as you know, well, maybe you don't, but the Convention on Biological Diversity has 3 main objectives. One is conservation. The second is sustainable use of species. The third is access and benefit sharing, which means that in order to access some of the plants and animals that we have and their genetic resources, there needs to be sharing of benefits to the communities that developed or that nurtured those species. So I was listening earlier to the presentations and we have a lot of species. So this is something that should be important for us. So what it says here is that the benefits should be shared because so far there has not been any sharing. Okay. Target 1 talks about national planning and how we need to we need to mainstream biodiversity when we plan how we use the different parts of the country, and there needs to be respect for indigenous peoples. Because we also have our own way of planning, like designating sacred sites, or having indigenous rangers, or having governance mechanisms, governance ways of governing our territory. Then you have this very famous 30 by 30 target, which wants to protect 30% of land and sea by 2030. And it also says that there needs to be attention paid to the indigenous territories and traditional territories. Okay? And more importantly for this meeting, I guess, is the notion of use of wild species and addressing overexploitation. And of course, we have to make sure that use, trade of wild species is legal, sustainable, and safe for the environment and for people. And again, indigenous peoples are there. Same with Target 9, customary sustainable use. And then the need to take indigenous people's knowledge into account in decision making on how we manage our biodiversity. Of course, we have financial resources, recognizing that we have practices that need to be supported. And important, again, respect for rights and making sure that environmental defenders are protected. So, to conclude, we are in a current state of crisis, and it's also related to the threats that indigenous people's territories are facing. So there is a gap between the current state and the future state that we want, which is living in harmony with nature. And to help bridge this gap, we should build and nurture high-trust partnerships with indigenous peoples. And I've run out of time, but I would gladly provide some insight about the role of young people. I have two young ladies from the Philippines who have important work on the ground, but I can address that when we have a discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Jennifer. That was a very insightful presentation, and it was great hearing more about the roles of indigenous peoples in conservation, especially in the Philippines. Our next speaker, Dr. Anthony Medrano, is a professor of environmental studies at Yale and US College, Singapore. And an environmental historian, Dr. Anthony's expertise lies in studying the historical relationships between Southeast Asian societies and the nature around them. In his speech, Dr. Anthony will discuss the changes in Southeast Asian attitudes, perceptions, and interactions with nature through the stories of prominent Southeast Asian conservationists throughout history. It is by looking back to the past that we can look into the future. And through his speech, Dr. Anthony will show us how we once lived with nature to inspire us and our actions towards a continued future of living with nature. Dr. Anthony, please.
Thank you so much for that, Koi. Just congratulations to everybody for being here. Thank you to our distinguished guests and speakers and participants. I'm going to jump right into it because 10 minutes in the end is not a lot of time. Like Koi said, I'm a historian, so I'm going to talk about, or I'm going to share rather, three stories. Three stories about people living with Southeast Asian natures. And those three stories are represented here. One will come from the Philippines, one will come from Singapore, and one will come from Malaysia, Singapore, and also Sumatra. And what I want to try to stress through these three stories is that the work of conservation today is also about the labor of individuals, citizens, scientists, and citizen scientists in the past. And so I'm going to turn to my first story, which is about an ornithologist named Dioscoro S. Rabor. So Dioscoro also went by the name Joe, and Joe was born in Katkar City on the Philippine island of Cebu in 1911. Joe studied zoology at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, getting degrees in 1932 and 1934. Today, Los Baños, the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, is the headquarters, or shares the campus with the headquarters, of the ASEAN Center for Biodiversity. Early on, Joe loved the field, being in the field. And it was through being in the field that he really shared a life with nature. He was especially taken by birds and their life histories. And here's a picture of Joe in the field. For Joe, being with nature meant living with nature because he led so many bird expeditions, scientific expeditions. These were in the Philippines, these were in Malaysia, these were in Sabah, these were in Indonesia. And these expeditions were for science, for research, and for education. Over the course of Joe's long career, he amassed 60,000 specimens of birds and other fauna. And today, these specimens form the heart of the Natural History Museum at the University of Los Baños, where it's used for research and teaching. But it was through these expeditions that Joe developed deep personal partnerships and relationships with the local communities who cohabited near the birds that he was trying to study and collect. These birds were in the lowlands, the highlands, the forests, and the valleys of the Philippines. This experience also brought into sharp view the state of avian diversity in the Philippines. In 1965, and really drawing from these expeditional experiences, Joe co-founded the Philippine Eagle Foundation. And that foundation today is responsible for really saving and studying the Philippine eagle, which is the national bird of the Philippines. In the 60s, it was in a critical state, and he was kind of central to raising awareness about this very unique bird, which, in partnership with the Jurong Bird Park here in Singapore, is running the only breeding program for this very unique and special bird. So through this one story, we've got an individual, and we're reminded that the work of conservation today stems from the labors of people in the past. And I just wanted to highlight Joe in that one particular point. Sticking with birds, I'll go to my second story, which is about Lok Wan To. Lok Wan To. Lok Wan To was born in KL, in Kuala Lumpur, and him and his mother and their family moved to Singapore in the 1920s. Mr. Lok founded the company, the Cathite Company, which the building is now where you've got a big mall. It's near Plaza Singapura. He was on the board of a number of different companies. He was a huge advocate for cinema. He ran a big theater. He sponsored and produced films. He attended film festivals. But he also was an avid ornithologist. He studied birds. So wherever he went for his business, he also made time to study birds. Here we have a picture of Mr. Lok and his autobiography called A Company of Birds, which is a very unique way of doing your autobiography through the story of birds, which is what Mr. Lok did. This is Mr. Lok's sister, Lady McNeice Yoon Peng. In this other slide to the right, this is an oral history of Lady McNeice conducted by the National Archives of Singapore that you can listen to now. The transcripts are available, as are the audio files. But in that recording, we learn that Mr. Lok escaped Singapore during the Japanese occupation. He was in a boat. The boat got blown up. He got saved. And then he was able to reconnect with his family, which was in a refugee camp in India. We learned all that from the sister sharing the story. When he's in India, Mr. Lok meets another avid birder named Salam Ali, who is the father of bird conservation in India. The two of them developed a lifelong friendship anchored in birds. Through the legacy of Mr. Lok and the legacy of his sister Yoon Peng and their families and foundations, we can see today their visible efforts through partnerships and support for nature conservation, biodiversity research, and environmental education here in Singapore. Mrs. Lok's foundation, for example, supports a lot of biological surveys of the nature parks in Singapore. My last story, which is going to be very quick, is about a gentleman named Ishak bin Ahmad. Ishak bin Ahmad's family started in West Sumatra. He's Minangkabau. The family moves to Penang, and from Penang they moved to Perak, and from Perak they moved to Singapore in 1923. Ishak was a citizen scientist who studied fish because he lived with fish. He grew up in an area that was right by the river and the sea, and so he was very familiar with fish. He knew lots of fish names and fish uses. As a result, he worked with the Bureau of Fisheries, based here in Singapore. And these documents here are from the National Archive of Malaysia. And what they indicate is that Mr. Ishak bin Ahmad was part of this scientific expedition to study the marine life around Singapore and Malaysia. He was the only Malay scientist on that expedition. These are some, and here he is. This is Mr. Ishak here with the crew of the tongkol. Tongkol is a kind of tuna. That's Mr. Ishak there. So he's part of the crew as a scientist, citizen scientist, working for the Bureau of Fisheries. Here's some of the work they do. Later, he becomes the director of fisheries in Malaya, which includes Singapore and the Straits of Malacca, Straits settlements. He's the first non-European to head a government agency, so very significant historically and culturally. He's also, again, remember, a fish guy, a citizen scientist. These are more, okay. He runs a radio program in Malay, telling people, encouraging people on the radio, eat more fish, know your environment. This is because people are living with nature. So here's a sample of that from the newspapers. He turns their boat, the government's boat, into a fish box, basically refrigerates it. This boat, Kembong, named after a fish as well. That's Mr. Ishak there at the wheel. He's turning this ice boat, refrigerating it so that more fish can come to the cities and feed people, but also so that more people can make a good living in the fishing sector. He gets an award. He's part of a Malay association. Actually, it's a political association, which was very significant in Singapore politics. His knowledge culminates in this book by J.S. Scott. And here we've got from the acknowledgements in that book, Mr. Scott acknowledging the support and insight and knowledge of Mr. Ishak. He says, the wealth and knowledge of experience of Mr. Ishak, Ishak consented to examine the manuscript and made many valuable comments which have been incorporated in this work. So Mr. Ishak is quite central to this publication. Here, Mr. Ishak is with his son. That's his son on the top. This is Mr. Ishak with the orange dot. So here in the beginning, we had a citizen scientist growing up around fish, living with fish, being with fish, follows that into a career with the government, continues to provide that service of studying fish and naming fish, all this kind of rich environmental knowledge. And then here we've got the father seeing his son get married at the wedding. That's his son, the son of Ishak bin Ahmad, Singapore's first president. Many thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Anthony. That was a great speech, and it was great hearing about the works, the stories, and the lives of our Southeast Asian forerunners working to conserve nature in Southeast Asia, whose shoulders we youth now stand on to do the work that we do today. Our next speaker is Mr. Vatanatoy, warmly known back home as Uncle Elephant. Mr. Vatana works as the Program Director for Wild Earth Allies in Cambodia. His work focuses on collaborating with rural communities to create simple yet effective solutions to mitigate farmer-elephant conflict. And I will not steal his stage any longer. Mr. Vatana, please.
Thank you, Sikoy. Okay, before the start presentation, I would like to back to the slide, the first slide of my, with my photo. Yes. So, yes, my name is Serai Watana, call me Watana, and my nickname is Uncle Elephant. Yeah. So, I prepared my presentation for 10 minutes for the speak here. But when I come to Singapore, and I joined the event yesterday, and I saw the youth of Singapore and many young people from different countries in Asia made me remember his story, the story of the one boy 45 years ago. That boy is me. So, yeah, I was born in 1970 in Phnom Penh City with a middle class family, and most of my family had a high education. I live with a very well condition in that time and in city boy. But the good condition with the boy only 5 years. When Khmer rule come to occupy Cambodia country, they chase all the people from the city to remote area. And then they look for the family who have educated. They had to kill or they investigate, and they may be put in the jail or prison or put very difficult condition for living. My father understand this and lead my family, myself was 5 years old in that time, escaped from the Phnom Penh city to hide in very remote area. And that area no one know us. Because my father trained me, told me that if Khmer rule asks who we are, let's say we come from the garment factory, we work for the government, no educated people. And then, very structural life for more than 3 years during Khmer rule. And then most of my family, my relatives was killed, nearly all. After the Khmer rule, my father leave me in the village, and he come back to the Phnom Penh city to see our family, to see our house. Unfortunately, everything gone. My father returned to village and told me that we decide to continue our life in this village. We will not return to the city anymore. And then my family, I become buffalo keeper, country boy, no city boy anymore. And then in the morning, I go to school. Afternoon, I need to have family to keep buffalo. And then I study. I had the book with me when I keep the buffalo and read the book and study. And after Khmer rule, still continue the civil war. And our life very difficult in that time, but I struggled very hard for education. Only few of my friends from the village that finished high school. So I was 9 years old. I love to see elephant. I love elephant so much. But in that, around my village, rich of biodiversity, but unlucky, no elephant in the forest. One day when I come back from the field, when I took my buffalo to my village, to my family, my mom told me, "Oh, Watana, you missed to see 2 domestic elephants from the north of Cambodia. They took the elephant to the village because they sell traditional medicine. Indigenous group own those 2 elephants. But she told me that the elephant may be moved to another village about 6 kilometers from here. So that already. I went to talk with my friend. It was a kid 9 years old. I called with, asked them at my age. And then I convinced them to accompany me to go that village to see the elephant. So very dangerous. We need to walk through the forest and then go to reach that village. And then I try to collect some grass for elephant food when I walk through the forest. And we reach the village, and then I ask permission from the owner of the elephant to provide the food to elephant. But no elephant did not eat because I took the wrong food for elephant. But in my heart, I was so happy that I see the elephant. I asked the owner of the elephant a lot of questions about what they eat and where, how they live in. So that owner of elephant explained me a lot, told me a lot, and then I learned a lot about the elephant ecology from that time. And then I come back home, I could not sleep in that night. My father a little bit get angry with me because I went there without permission from them. Yeah. And then I come back very late because so I imagine when I grow up, I want to travel to the mountain north of Cambodia where rich of biodiversity because the owner of the elephant told me that, oh, in that area, huge forest, has the flower, has the river, the mountain, and many the elephant, baby elephant there. I want to see in the forest so much. But under Civil War, and I was so young, was a kid, I could not travel in that time. Just the one village moved to another village, we need the permission letter from village chief. Yeah. So I tried studying so hard, and then I finished my high school, and then I got scholarship study abroad. I come back from abroad. I start work with forestry in 1996. I had opportunity to work with Elephant Project. Just 2003, I meet with the two elephant conservationists from Cambridge. They come to Cambodia to help establish Asian Elephant Project in Cambodia. I told them that this is my opportunity that I can join with Elephant Project. And then this story, so I will like present my presentation. How to come back from okay. Yes, 2003, I worked with Elephant Project, but I was a master degree on forestry. And in Cambodia, no expert, Cambodian people, no expert work for wildlife conservation, and that, especially for elephant. But I start volunteer to work with the project because my heart told me this opportunity, that great opportunity that I start to work with my dream from the kid. So when people from Cambridge start to talk about the design, the program, Asian Elephant Conservation Project in Cambodia, one of those programs has one hot activity that people complain a lot about human-elephant conflict. And then I ask myself, I love people. I live in remote area when I was a kid. I want to help people, but I love elephant. So, but human-elephant conflict come to me right now that when I go to meet people, they think I'm an expert, or like I'm the one of the person can chase elephant away from the farm. What they want, what they expect. But I did not know how to do this. But I had to think and consider one thing, that I think that how my investor in Cambodia protect their farm from the elephant during that time. So I try to interview with the people and correct the people who work with me, especially the two pretty guys that from the Cambridge. They look for the fund for me. I want to go to Africa, to Kenya, to study about human-elephant conflict there. I spent some time with Masai Mara community there to learn how people live with elephant, how they protect the farm, chase elephant away with from the farm. So I come back from Kenya. I I established one book. This the book all the method that how to mitigate human elephant conflict, and so I applied this method. But very simple. This the book very simple method because the Cambodia people in remote area they cannot read very difficult language, just a simple language. So this that I can help people to protect their farm, yeah. And these people in the village, when they saw me in public transportation by bus, they call me Uncle Elephant because they difficult to remember my name Serai Watana, but they know me that I love people and love elephant. Anytime when I went there, I explain people, educate people, please don't kill elephant. Any problem we can, because not we encroach to their habitat. We plant anything in their habitat. So this elephant not make the mistake. Please we try to find out a good solution with elephant. So people call me elephant, Uncle Elephant. Yes, we try to educate people in that area. This human elephant conflict that we try to educate with people. Yeah, so yeah, these people at the beginning they get angry with elephant, and with sometimes they get angry with my team that why allow elephant to eat they farm. But at the beginning they don't want, people did not want to get involved with my team because they feel useless. But you see these people in the front line, they try to grow banana and sugarcane. So because in that area, when people travel to the coast, tourists travel there, they like to buy the banana because they put the banana to forest spirit to request them to work with them for safe travel for along that road. So people grow the banana is a very good strategic good market for them. But the problem, elephant eat the banana. So we try to convince people to change the crop. Change the crop from banana. We encourage them to grow the chili plant. We try people to grow short-term crop that easy to protect and collect the crop, and combined with some method that I established. So people get more and more involved with my team to join with human elephant conflict mitigation team. But time very short for me. But one thing that I would like to suggest, any method that we try to apply to chase elephant from the farm cannot success without the people work as a team, guard the crop in the field, and we need to change method very fast. At least one method, 1 week, because the elephant very smart. They will judgment this method is the people try to cheat them. They know, and then they never scare the method. Like I give example, one method we put hammock, deploy hammock around the farm, and then put the perfume there, and make elephant confused that people sleep in the hammock. But 1 week later, elephant know that there are no people there. And watermelon out of plantation were destroyed at all by the elephant. So I encourage, we need to change the method very fast, otherwise elephant will know this. So yeah, I think the time is out, so I would like, any question, will respond, but this I would like to finish my speech now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patana. It was great hearing about your life with nature, and I'm sure many of us here can relate with the same passion that Mr. Patana felt with wildlife, and that's why we are all gathered here today to celebrate conservation in Southeast Asia. And last but not least, our next speaker, we have Mr. Hao Chun Bing. Mr. Chun Bing is the Director of Wildlife Management and Outreach in NParks Singapore, where he works to mitigate human-wildlife conflict in our urban spaces. Today, Mr. Chun Bing also finds himself in volunteer conservation groups like the otter and long-tailed macaque as part of NParks, where he has had the opportunity to engage with international, regional, and national stakeholders in the name of living with nature. He's here today to share with us the many ways NParks works to reduce human-wildlife conflict. And despite how tiny and crowded Singapore is, Mr. Chun Bing's work manages to do the impossible task of helping all 5 million of us live with nature. Mr. Chun Bing, please.
Yep. Hello, morning everybody. So I'm Chun Bing, and unfortunately I have to come after Vatana, where you're talking about elephants and destroying livelihoods and lives at stake, and then now I'm going to talk about pigeons in Singapore. Maybe a bit more, but okay. Anyway, I'm going to talk about wildlife conflict in Singapore, and then what's the situation like, and what are you going to do about it? How are we going to get to being a city in nature, right? So this for those who are not Singaporeans, this is a photograph of Singapore. It basically shows almost a third of Singapore already. So we are very small, in case you haven't noticed by now. So we've got about 5.5 million people living there, and that's why our speed limits are very low, right? Because if you drive more than 80, you might fall off the edge. It's a joke. Okay, we've got a few strategies to get to how we can coexist with nature, right? And we want to enhance the nature. And first of all, we are going to extend our nature park network. For those who don't know, this nature park network is basically a series of nature parks, your parks connectors, your nature ways, and then we're going to build all this, right? And then they form a sort of a buffer around our nature reserves, so you can actually protect the nature reserves, but at the same time, it allows Singaporeans to use it for recreation. We want to intensify nature, so whatever we have in our gardens and parks is just going to go beyond just simple greenery. We're going to put in more wildlife. So instead of pigeons, right, you're going to have pink-breasted pigeons. Instead of having just crows, maybe you can bring in more like, not koels but other birds as well. Koels, by the way, is a problematic bird in Singapore for those who don't know. And we want to, we have 5.5 million people living in a concrete place, right? We want to soften that. And how we're going to do that, we want to actually bring in nature into our built environment. So wherever we can, we're going to infuse it with greenery. Fourthly, you're going to have a forest. If you have a big forest and you split it into fragments, right, it's of no use, right? But if it's already split, the best thing you can do is actually try to connect them back together. And we're going to create that connectivity between all our patches of forest. And lastly, we want to enhance our vets, the ability to care for and then to manage animals. Because if you're going to bring in animals, you better know what to do with them when they appear, right? So we get a lot of, you guys know that we're getting a lot of this news coming up all the time, otters popping, crows attacking. You get a nice photograph of Batana with elephants and all that. If you Google me, you probably see me with a picture of a crow, like flying over my head. That's about as dramatic as it gets here. But we have these things are still very real. Like, what are you going to do with seabirds appearing in your backyard? Your otters eating your koi. And these are situations that we have to deal with. We are going to have a few approaches to that, and that is to understand population ecology, manage the population, educate the public, and also get community to own the issues. And whatever approach we have, we want to make sure that it's scientific and then it's ethical. That means it is based on evidence and that it's based on humane measures. When I first saw the slides, I saw it as human population control instead of humane, which actually works also. But in the end, what we want to get at is, right, a balanced ecosystem. A balanced ecosystem is one where you have everything in that natural order. And it also means something. It means that you don't have to keep manipulating it. It is sustaining. It is able to manage itself without us giving too much inputs on it all the time. And the next thing that we want to ensure is that the public is protected. not just physically, but from potential like diseases and all that. So these are the two goals we want to achieve. So the first thing is population ecology. Now, we need to know the target animals that we are managing. We need to know how many there are in the forest, how many do we have, and then once we know that, we want to know like what is what is the trend for this animal? Is it going up? Is it going to go down? And whatever happens, like how do we then manage that situation? So we have to use all sorts of tools to actually predict that. So it's all very scientific based, like studies like this, and then how to manage the population. It's not one way is to actually modify the environment that the animal is in. So this is a study done in a neighboring country. It shows that in an area where there were a lot of oil palm, right? There was a lot of wild boar. Then when the oil palms were removed, the wild boar population went off. Then when the oil palm came back, the boar population came back again. So you might think, this is very obvious lah. You don't need the scientists to see that. But like I said, our work is all evidence-based lah. Cannot gut feel one. So that's gut feel in Singapore means, hey, you hungry? What you want to eat? Chicken rice. That is gut feel. This one is all evidence-based, okay? And then we find that exposure, when we exclude a patch of forest from the presence of wild pigs, actually the forest grows taller, grows more lush. And that's another reason why wild pigs might not be very good for environment. But that's another topic. But how to exclude the wild pigs from a certain place? There are fences you can build, and there's a specific type of fence for every different animal. But this is not a silver bullet. You cannot just put fencing everywhere and solve the problem, right? Certain places where it's appropriate, yes. And then we get all this, another way is like, stop providing food for the animals through feeding or leaving your food behind. Because you find that when you leave food behind, the population explodes because they have that ability to reproduce much more successfully. So this was a study done by one of my colleagues. And then it says that, so the scientific long sentence is restricted human activities, blah, 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 blah. But the easy sentence actually, circuit breaker led to change in pigeon behavior. So for those who don't know, in Singapore, when during the COVID, we had a lockdown, our name for that lockdown was called circuit breaker. So during that period, when there was no human activities, the number of pigeons went down, okay? It is not that the pigeons, the brain short circuit, so circuit breaker led to change in pigeon behavior. Okay, another thing, when we have wild animals, we also want to build our capacity to actually care for them. So we have our vets all trained up, and then they do take care of these animals, we rescue them, and then we make sure that they are in good condition before they're released again. So that's a pangolin, and sometimes we put in microchips, and some animal species where it's suitable, we put in tractors. So we have released a number of raptors together in our work with Mandai. Raptors, eagles, right, with trackers. So you can see some of the eagles with antennas sticking up from their back. Hopefully people don't mistake them as spy balloons, but okay. And then we have to minimize human-wildlife conflict because a lot of Singapore is crisscrossed by roads. And when you have a lot of greenery, you're going to have animals crossing roads and becoming roadkill, and we have to prevent that. And one way we do that is by having this RADS, which is basically a radar system. It detects animals crossing because the CCTV is like AI, so it knows that there's an animal crossing, and then it flashes a light, and the cars that are turning around the bend will slow down. Of course, it is AI, so you can recognize animal shapes crossing. I was told that it recognizes an animal shape, separating it from humans. So if a human crosses, there's no more. Maybe that's a glitch we have to amend, I don't know. Okay, so our expressways, all that, you can have all the warning systems, but you still need physical barriers at times to prevent animals from crossing. And that's what we have installed at various places. We have 3 minutes left, and then we have all these gates to stop animals from crossing, fences where appropriate. Okay, previously, when we first started out, right, we had like very few people knew how to deal with animals. You basically call the pest control to catch the snakes and all that. They were not equipped, right? It's not their fault. So what we did was, in the last few years, to actually have all this education to actually bring the whole industry up to international standards. And what we are doing is really not teaching people how to trap animals. These courses don't teach that. We actually come from 3 angles. Actually, we want to make sure that you are protecting the public, ensuring public safety when you do all these things. Secondly, that you have the welfare of the animal in mind. And lastly, that the operators themselves are protected. Okay, and then public education and community stewardship. We have lots of wildlife groups, and and it's a lot of community-driven efforts. So last night someone said that, someone, I can't remember, Marcus or Mark, you said that, what do we do to break down the doors and enter? In Singapore, no, you don't need. You invite you, please come. Actually, we are looking desperately for membership, new blood. And all these groups will welcome you with open arms, and they are actually the ones that drive a lot of efforts on the ground, like the Otter Group. And then we have also people, young people. We have also retirees. Uncle Singh, I think it's Uncle Singh, he goes around cycling looking out for the otters families. And then this is the macaque working group. The macaque working group, not so happy looking, because it was the end of a working day, so not their fault. And then we actually have a platform. This platform is focused on actually bringing education to the public, OWN, our wild neighbors. And as you can see, there's a group member, all the group members there. There's a problem with gender equality. So it's all women except for Bernard. And we have a lot of people going into our nature reserve and parks now. So we have to come out with all these educational messages. Do not do this, do not do that. But apart from do not, we also want to tell people what you can do. Right? So you have our garden bird watching, join us, and we can teach you how to do it properly. We have, like, anybody, if you're coming to Singapore for the first few times and then you want to go on a nature trail, go to the website, you click on something and it comes out with a full map and itinerary on what you can do. All right, and lastly, we have all these seminars. There are international speakers speaking to us about how they manage the different problems in their countries, and they're all on YouTube. So if you, I don't know how to do this, but just scan and then you can actually visit some of the sites. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chun-Bing, for the engaging speech. We'll now be moving on to our conversation, the panel discussion segment of this track. We have had the opportunity to hear from Ms. Jennifer, Dr. Anthony, Mr. Vatana, and Mr. Chun-Bing. And I hope all of you are raring with questions for our speakers, because I would now like to invite all of them back on stage for the panel discussion. Alright, for our audience, if you have any questions for them, you may scan the QR code on the screen and submit your questions onto our online portal. We will unfortunately not be taking in-person questions from the floor, but all your questions will be sent down to us, to the panel. Okay? I'd like to thank all our speakers once again for their amazing speeches. And while our audience questions roll in, perhaps I'd like to ask one of my own questions first, a nice simple one related to the track. So each of you have talked about your rich experiences in working with nature and the environment, and I'd love to hear from you, what does living with nature mean to each of you personally?
Well, living with nature is living with nature, but also interacting with those who are there, who are within the community. Like, for example, I used to teach a class, well, I still teach it, but on indigenous management. Hello? Management of resources. Indigenous management of resources. And it's one thing to teach and to let people know, intellectually what it is like. But the most important part of that course, I think, was bringing the students actually to a community. And I have one of the young people from the Philippines who is here is from that community that I brought them to. And in that way, it's one thing to learn here, but it's one thing also to learn here. So interact as much as possible with those who live in places. So this place that I brought them to is called Imugan, where the Ikalahan indigenous people live. And the people there were able to tell the students and to show the students around and tell them about what the community rules are around maintaining the trees, about maintaining the wildlife within the community. So it's also living with nature is also learning from those who live most closely with nature.
think for me, learning, living with nature is experiencing nature on a daily basis. I mean, I live here in Singapore. I benefit from the good work that Mr. Howe and others at IMParks do in terms of the parks, the reserves, the greenways, the connectors. It's part of my everyday life. I teach and I incorporate it into the classroom. We do field trips. I feel extremely fortunate and lucky to live in a place like Singapore that has this kind of access. In making it part of my life, my everyday life, it improves, I think, at least my quality of life, my work-life balance, my overall wellness. And I think through going to the different parks that we've got here in Singapore, which there are so many, then learning about different areas and different places and different names for different things, it's just constant. As an academic, we're just always interested in learning things. Learning doesn't stop. That's kind of what gets us into this profession. And so I think it's just living with nature is being with nature kind of on a daily basis, but just really thriving and embracing it. And trying to share, I guess, that enthusiasm with others who somehow feel, for whatever reason, slightly disconnected. Yeah.
Living with nature. For me, I'm not negative about the people who living in the town or city, but try to go to forest, very deep forest, and we stay there for a while. For myself, I feel very different. I feel relaxed, calm down. I told my story that in 1996 I was one of the foresters to lead the team to do the forest inventory in Cambodia, north of one province in the north of Cambodia near the Laos border. Very huge forest there that I never been in my life. When I first day I did my tour to the deep forest there, I make a camp to count the forest inventory there. Sun set. I feel I don't want to come back to the camp. I look at the beautiful flower, beautiful forest, many different of species and wildlife there and animal there, that I was crazy love the nature there. Yeah. So I don't know how to mention about the beautiful landscape and the good feeling in the forest, in the nature. But one thing I would like to invite you, if you have time, to join the trip with me to Cambodia, to the forest and stay there. You will feel like we are staying or in the different planet that we very relaxed, different like bird light, sing the song very early morning. So listen from the water flow from the stream, so nice, so beautiful. So this is what that I can share, living in nature.
I think living with nature for me is maybe this one. Okay. I think living with nature in Singapore for me is like signing a marriage cert. Okay. You guys, I mean for Singaporeans, you go on Tinder or whatever, you swipe left, swipe, you see some very beautiful, you can imagine living in a pristine greenery environment, and you decide to swipe right. And then once you are there, you're committed, right? And you get married to the person, but after a few years, right, living with this person got some problems. There's some habits I didn't know about. And that's what living in nature is going to be. Like, you got to accept that if you want butterflies, you're going to have caterpillars. So, deal with it, right? And then get to know your partner better, learn to coexist, because this marriage cannot back out. Okay, this I don't want to say forced marriage, right? But if it works out, right, it's a match made in heaven. All right, okay, thanks.
Thank you to our speakers for those great opinions on living with nature. Our next question is from the audience, and it's for Miss Jennifer. So, Miss Jennifer, reading question. I really adore your works. What is the biggest challenge in making the voices of Indigenous peoples heard by the government or public policy makers? And before I give the mic to Miss Jennifer, many of our other speakers also talked about learning from others who live with nature as well in their experiences of living with nature. And I also love to hear from them after Miss Jennifer on what are the things you've learned from other people and how we can amplify those voices in maybe policy making. Yeah, Miss Jennifer, please.
Yeah, well, the biggest barrier is communication, because a lot of the indigenous peoples, especially in very remote places, they will not be able to speak the languages. The second is the distance, no? Taking from Tinder and long distance relationships are hard. So, yeah, there has to be some way to get the messages from the very deep forests into the mainstream. And one of the things that we're doing is supporting young indigenous communicators and providing translation. Because, you know, these young people, when they go to their communities and they're able to catch the words of the elders, we found that it's very, very powerful. And they're also very adept in using social media so that the information comes in little digestible pieces and so forth. So that's one approach, to get the message, transform it into a language that is understood by the mainstream population, and then get it from there to here. The good thing now is that you have satellite technology, no? So it's easy to bring this kind of technology even in the very, very remote places, and then it gets transmitted. And you know, there's no limit to the creativity that we found that young indigenous peoples have. And then of course we have to deal with the discrimination. In the Philippines, we still have laws in place that say that shifting cultivation or kaingin is bad, but they don't look at the cultural way that indigenous peoples are doing shifting cultivation and the benefits to biodiversity. So there need to be more studies to show what benefits are there. So that's why we're trying to connect the scientists to the indigenous peoples, and then yeah, just transform it into policy. And this is, I guess, this is where lawyers, people who are trained in the legal tradition, come in. So that's what most of my life work has been, is trying to transform the things, the wisdom of indigenous elders and indigenous young peoples in the very remote areas, so that the policymakers can understand it. So that's why my presentation looked that way.
In terms of learning from others, I think what I think about is learning the multiple or many ways of knowing nature. Each community has its own sort of, I think, set of ideas, its practices and rituals and vocabularies about nature. So I think we can learn a lot from other people about how people see the environment, especially in terms of, you know, not just through a kind of ecosystem services lens, but perhaps through a cultural services lens. So the cultural value that certain things have. Mangroves play very important roles in people's lives, in their wellness, and they have for a long, long time. So I think looking at history and thinking about the way in which different communities have known and understood and even stewarded, I think, the environment is really, really helpful for work today. At least for me as a historian, there's a lot of richness in the past that I think is valuable for appreciating what we do and kind of understanding how we got where we are, and seeing those traces of cultural ways of knowing. Finally, I think in the present, finally getting sort of taking center stage and really being valued and appreciated. You know, this wasn't always the case a long time ago, but now those types of knowledges are really, really central. So yeah.
Thank you. For me, what I learned from the nature, when I went to remote area or go to the forest, I learned from the Indian group or the local community. That is the culture, because I need to make myself very very make the people in that area very close relationship with me. So the one thing that I need to learn, like the language. Sometimes there's some language there. I cannot learn. I'm not the faster to learn different language, but try to learn some word from the Indian group or the community there, and we try to choose that connection with the people there, and then even though the way that I eat or stay there, we don't try to make ourselves different from them, my friend. Make them feel like I'm one of them too. So this easy to connect with them and can learn from them or work with them very, very closely. When they trust us, that another thing, very honest with them. What we promise, what we probably try to collaborate with them to help them. We must try to do this. Or sometimes if I promise that I will go to that area on this day, so I try to, sometimes difficult with my work in the office, but I try to promise to follow the plan that I promised them. So this is what I learned from them.
This is quite, your question was what we can learn from other people and all that, right? I won't go into specifics, but I think one thing that we as a group have learned, my team and I, is that you can never take wholesale one solution and then implement it in your context. And I think vice versa, it is actually, sometimes we talk about us having best practices. I think it borders on actually arrogance to think that we can take our best practices and sell it to other people without fully understanding their situation, their context also as well.
Right, thank you. And of course, Southeast Asia is so amazing because we have such a diverse range of countries with so many different cultures and backgrounds. And our next question from the audience is, considering all these different cultures and backgrounds of Southeast Asian countries, do you think there can ever be a universal understanding of what living with nature is?
Yeah, I think there can be a universal understanding of the principles of what living with nature is. Of course, the contexts are so different. We're so, as you said, we're so diverse, no? So, and as I completely agree with what was said about not blindly importing something that works in one area and then transferring it to another area. But I think one thing that the science has found is that our strength as a global community, or maybe even as a regional community here in Southeast Asia, is in our diversity. It's in the different points of view that we have in life and about living in harmony with nature. And I think as long as we can distill that into general principles that would apply universally, I think we can have cross-cultural understandings. For example, number one, under the Convention on Biological Diversity, one of the key indicators of ecosystem health is the number of speakers of the different indigenous languages. It's not saying that the languages should all be the same. What it's saying is that it's the diversity that strengthens our connection and our relationship to nature. Therefore, if we are able to provide the conditions for people to be able to maintain the language that they have for the different things that you find that they find within their community, within their nature, then that's an indicator that we are doing a good job in protecting biodiversity. So,
I think I'll be very faster. I'm going to maybe echo and completely endorse what Ma'am Jean said. I think it's a set of shared values and less a sort of a shared practice, but really an appreciation for the diversity and finding the richness in that diversity and the commonality in that diversity through a set of shared values, so principles and values.
The question is what the question repeat again? The culture, live with the nature.
Yes, so because Southeast Asia is so culturally diverse, do you think there can ever be a unified meaning of what living with nature is?
Yes, I like to read what experience that I learned from my country only because I don't have time to learn much with other country. But I would like to ask a question: how many of you in this room visit Cambodia and visit Angkor Wat? You see that? Oh, many. Thank you. And and you know, this historical culture, not only in Cambodia, in the world. You see, thousands of elephants to join to build Angkor Wat. Yeah, and without elephant, the big construction, famous construction cannot complete like that. And you see on the wall of the Angkor Temple, you see, can tell us about the very close connection between between the people and nature. Yeah, you see, people ride on elephant in the world forest, and they pick the fruit, the wild fruit from the forest, the monkey in the forest, the bird in the forest, and very can see that people and nature live very harmony to each other. So this I just said like right now we still conserve the elephant in Cambodia, and why people in Cambodia they respect elephant, so Asian elephant so much, because of the one thing, elephant trying to build Angkor Wat, and another thing is the elephant and people live together 400 or 1,000 years ago. So yeah, this is what I learned from it.
Yeah, I think if the intention, if what you're talking about being universal is actually to protect and enhance biodiversity, there's no disagreement, it's very clear. But how you're going to achieve that, we leave it to the individual countries. I'm talking about Southeast Asian context, and that's why we have the ASEAN Flyway Network. That's one example. It is a lot of countries working together to protect migratory birds, which fly through all the countries. And the intention, yes, is to protect the birds, but how each country goes about doing that, we provide the resources, we tell us what you need, provide resources, and you decide on the best way to do it. So the goal is there, but the approaches can be different, and that's fine. We all agree that it needs to be different, and it should be.
And of course, it's this difference in diversity in Southeast Asia, which is why we have symposiums such as this, to bring all our youth down together to hear from and learn from each other, so we can better protect biodiversity in Southeast Asia. And our next question is to Mr. Hao. So, but of course, if our other speakers would like to answer, please go ahead. What do you think about the lookism prevalent in people's perceptions and treatment of wildlife? For example, people like cute otters more than, I don't know, rats.
Sorry, what's the question again? What do you think?
About the lookism prevalent in people's perception and treatment of wildlife. So like perhaps people favor
What's
cuter
lookism?
features. Like when you favor something based on how it looks.
Oh wow, that's the way the world works, right? I mean, I always wanted to be an air steward, but like, it worked out. Okay, I think there is a reason why certain animals are more charismatic, and we can all understand why, right? That's why the animal of choice for WWF is a panda, because it's so iconic and charismatic. But when we are talking about biodiversity, like it is not K-pop, right? It's not about looks. Every different animal matters in their own ecological niche, and that is part of the thing that we are doing when you educate people about biodiversity. It's not about the size of it and how furry it is or what it looks like. It is actually that every animal, every species will play a role in the whole ecosystem, and that's what just now we talked about balance, and that contributes to balance as well. I hope that sort of answers lookism.
Well, if they're not, let's make them cute. I think you were also distributing last night and maybe today the stickers, you know, and there are ways, you know, to make some types of animals more charismatic. I particularly like the story of Dr. Lim earlier about the porcupine, the soft-spined porcupine. It looks ugly, but the story behind it is interesting, no? And if we can have people make, those cartoons that you have in the stickers, make it even more charismatic. And I think it's the stories behind these species that could make a difference, no? Emphasize the connection, but also use the tools that we have nowadays to make them more charismatic, or make people better able to connect to these animals and what they are about.
Okay, so perhaps going back to the theme of the symposium, it's a youth symposium for youths. And I love to, all of you have such rich backgrounds working with the environment. And I'd love to hear from you. Do you have any advice for youths who are budding environmentalists and nature stewards as they pursue their journey into the environmental studies?
Well, you're not going to be rich.
This, what a mistake that I would like to advise. Oh. Okay, I have let I not advise, but let you think about what I say. People in my generation that when the world born, that the nature brought to the characteristic of the each people from the bird. Like myself, when I was born, I love elephant. So when I grow up, I cannot work as businessman or cannot work as a computer scientist. I will work for conservationist. Absolutely, I will be like this. Because my heart is the conservationist from the kid already. So the way that I work, I will try to direct my career, meet with my goal, with my dream. And then I can see some of my friends, they have talent or from the nature. They don't like elephant. They don't like the nature. They love to work like a businessman, development. So this, when we grow up, we get a little bit older, we become the leader of the sector that we work. Yeah. Some of my friends become the businessman or provincial governor. I become the director of the conservation NGO. When we meet, or sometimes we have conflict at June there. But we are friends. So because some of my friends, they think to develop the country, to make people happy, is to bring people to have a lot of money in their pocket. But me, I think different. I said, if we can protect the forest, if we can live with a lot of wildlife in Cambodia, I think it's a very harmony between people and nature. So this is sometimes challenge question, and sometimes I think that it's very stupid that you decide to do this. But I would like to advise or give the message for the next generation. Yeah. And when you grow up, you become the businessman, developer, but spare something about the conservationist, about the nature in your heart. And then when not only on the mouth, in your heart, and then even do 10% or 20% in your heart, it keep the nature, respect environment in your heart, is a very good thing that you can think about your work and then compromise any business plan or any work that you work that bring harmony with conservationists or development plan that can bring sustainable development and harmony with the nature. Thank you. This is my message.
me, so I'm a teacher. I teach at a university, so I'm going to stick to like kind of what I know and not suggest things I really don't know. So one, I think, especially the youth here and you're from the region, I would encourage you to learn a language, a new language, a language outside of the one you already know. I think this will strengthen the network that you have. It'll increase probably the kinds of collaborations and partnerships that you can cultivate. So I think language is really important. And a language that isn't necessarily your national language. So I think that's one big thing. I mean, in my own life, I've looked back, how did I end up in Singapore teaching at a university in Southeast Asia? And it was a life of learning languages. And through language, you learn about different ways of knowing and different cultural and historical experiences. And I think all of that informs the environment in which we are a part of, and perhaps even will strengthen us with the tools to work collectively to protect it. So language is one. Two, I would say, as soon as you can and when you can, travel the region as well. So through, I think, the symposium, you're meeting lots of new people. Perhaps go visit each other's area and take the sort of nature walks. Go to northern Cambodia and see the elephants. So get, I think, deep in that sense of the ASEAN-ness of sorts. Internalize it, embody it. I think it's through language, it's also through travel. And I think the third thing that I would suggest, again, because I'm a teacher, it would be much of what we face today is absolutely urgent and it's present and it's at the now. But I think it's valuable to learn about the stories and the peoples that have kind of laid the groundwork for this, that have paved the path for things like this to happen. So learn the history behind some of these movements and these conventions and these gatherings. I think that only strengthens the way in which we might see and plan for the future. So language, travel, and history, I think, are the three things that I would suggest.
Well, I wanted to bring it full circle about whether or not you will get rich doing this kind of work. The rainbows and unicorns answer is you will become richer for your work-life balance. If you're someone who gets energy from being with nature, then this kind of work will enhance that sort of balance. And with mental health-wise, you will become richer. But to be honest, you can also become rich in this line of work because as long as my advice is to keep on caring for the environment, being an environmentalist at heart, but also don't close off some of the interdisciplinary work that you do. For example, I'm a lawyer. I never expected to be working on biological diversity, but here I am. And now I work for an US-based foundation that supports the work of indigenous peoples, and we work with very rich people, billionaires, and convince them to contribute, to give money to the work that we have with indigenous peoples, and that's an opportunity. And then maybe one thing I would say is the global biodiversity framework that you just saw has one target requiring all corporations to disclose their dependencies on nature as well as their impact on nature. And that will require someone who knows about the environment to be part. So now a lot of them are recruiting to be part of their teams so that they can analyze their value chains, their production chains, so that they can disclose what needs to be disclosed. There are economists now that need to be hired by governments because it says, the Global Biodiversity Framework says that you have to identify the incentives that are bad for biodiversity, and you have to find a way to transform how you do your policies so that all of these negative incentives for biodiversity can be transformed into positive incentives. And then a lot of companies now also need to hire indigenous relations specialists because there are safeguards that have been adopted that will that require them to ask the consent of indigenous peoples, develop relationships with indigenous peoples, and so forth. So things are opening up. Before I came here, the last meeting that I was in Buckingham Palace, and it was with the different banks who had to think about how their work as banks, impacts on biodiversity. And you know, these corporations, they don't pay small amounts to their people. You're not going to become a billionaire. You're not going to become very rich, but if you manage to be able to get into these corporations and guide how they do their work better so that it's not destroying nature, then you may become rich.
And unfortunately, that brings us to the end of our panel discussion segment. I hope all of you walk away from today with new insights, new knowledge, and a new desire to continue working with the environment, be it for passion or for money. But once again, thank you to all our speakers for their valuable insights and excellent conversations and speeches, and to our audience for your attention and your great questions. Before we end off the track, I'd like to present the speakers with a token of appreciation.
So, Sukha will present to our Mr. Hao Chun Ming. Next, for Mr. Vatana. Next up, we have Prof. Madrano. And last but not least, Mem Jing. Thank you very much to our speakers. That was an incredible track session. So we're off to a great start for the symposium. Now, I bet some of you are getting a bit hungry, right? So we're going to break for lunch very quickly. May I please invite our guests of honor, our speakers, and our partners to make their way out to get ahead of the queue. The rest of you, I'm so sorry. Make no